My father said it mid-laugh, holding a beer in one hand and pointing his tongs at the grill with the other. It was just loud enough to carry over the music, just casual enough to pass as humor. Everyone chuckled. Even my mother, Patricia, let out one of those tight, polite laughs she saves for when guests are around. My younger brother Kyle, standing across from her with a solo cup and his ever-smug grin, laughed the hardest. His wife Becca nudged him like he should stop. He didn't. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the plate in front of me, potato salad untouched. The same recipe I'd brought to this barbecue for over 10 years. It used to be my dad's favorite. Now it sat in the corner of the food table, half warm and forgotten. They hadn't made a seat for me. Everyone else had name cards, little folded squares of cardstock that Becca probably printed on her Cricut. Mine was missing. I stood there with a full plate and nowhere to sit, like a neighbor who wandered into the wrong party. So I took the spot near the trash can just behind the patio fan. I listened to the buzz of conversation like I was under glass. The joke hung there, still circling in my chest. It wasn't even original. I'd heard it before in sitcoms, bad breakups, offhand remarks at office parties. But never from the man who taught me how to ride a bike. Never from someone who once kissed my scraped knees and said I mattered. That day, something in me went still. Not broken, not angry, just still. And I remember thinking, when exactly did I stop being part of this family's picture? Because I used to be in the center of it. They never asked me to save them, not out loud anyway, but somehow I always knew when I was expected to step in. I was 19 when my father lost his job. The factory had been scaling back for months, small layoffs here and there, but when it finally reached his level, it hit hard. Mortgage payments lapsed. Mom started working double shifts at the clinic, and the tension in our kitchen grew so thick you could taste it between bites of boxed macaroni. So I deferred college. Just for a semester, I told myself. Just until things leveled out. I picked up shifts at the grocery store and put half my paychecks toward the mortgage. At night, I watched over Kyle while our parents slept. He was 13, then moody and lost barely speaking since Dad's layoff. They never asked. But when they cashed the checks I left on the kitchen counter, no one turned them away either. 6 months turned into a year. Then 2. By the time things leveled out, Kyle had started high school and suddenly needed rides to football practice, SAT prep college tours. He didn't ask Mom or Dad. He asked me. He called me Lainey. He was the only one who ever did. Back then, it felt like a thread still connecting us. I finally went back to school at 24 nights and weekends part-time. I worked full-time at a print shop, studied on my lunch breaks, graduated quiet and debt-free. No one came to the ceremony. Mom said she had to work. Dad forgot the date. Kyle didn't forget. He just said, "That's cool," and asked if I could help him fix his resume. By the time he graduated 2 years later, the whole family threw a backyard party with balloons, banners, matching t-shirts. I remember standing at the grill flipping burgers while Dad announced to a neighbor that Kyle's going to do big things. No one mentioned I'd helped him write his entire college application. That's how it was year after year. I became the helper, the standby adult. The one they could call when the power went out or the dog needed a vet visit or a tuition bill came early. I was useful, steady, quiet, and Kyle. Kyle became the story they told at dinner. The kid who pulled through, who made it out, who married well, who gave them grandkids. The one they cheered for. The one whose name showed up on homemade ornaments and birthday cakes. Sometimes I wondered, did they ever stop to ask what I made it through? Or had I made it all too easy for them to forget? It was a photo that did it. I stopped by my parents' house one Sunday to drop off some extra bedding they'd asked for. Kyle's kids were spending the weekend and apparently they'd forgotten to bring blankets. I didn't stay. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just left the bag by the hallway and was about to head out when I noticed a new frame on the mantel. It was a picture from last Thanksgiving. My mother, Patricia, had her arm around Kyle's wife, Becca, beaming. Kyle stood beside them holding his son. My father was in the back holding a carving knife mid-laugh. Even the neighbor, Mrs. Houghton, had somehow made it into the shot. But I wasn't in it. I stared at that photo for a full minute. I had been there. I had helped cook the meal. I had washed every single dish while they sat on the porch drinking mulled cider. But looking at that photo, it was like I'd never existed in the room. I asked Mom about it later, casually. "Did you ever get that other picture, the one where I was sitting next to Kyle on the porch swing?" She blinked like I was speaking a different language. "Oh, I think that one was blurry. Or maybe someone was blinking. Becca probably just picked the best one." That was the whole answer. She went back to stirring soup like she hadn't just erased me from the memory of a day I helped hold together. And then came my birthday. Or rather, Kyle's son's birthday, which they decided without telling me would be held on the same day in the same house using the same cake. My mother called the morning after. "Sorry we didn't reach out. Things got a little chaotic." You understand, right? I didn't answer. Because what was there to say? That week, I logged into the shared family photo album one I'd created years ago to help everyone stay connected and noticed that my name had been removed as a collaborator. I wasn't blocked. I wasn't kicked out. I was just no longer part of it. No one told me. No one needed to. I scrolled through the pictures anyway. There were new family portraits, captions, group messages under each. One photo had a comment that said, "The whole gang together." I wasn't in it. I had taken it. And that was when I understood something. I hadn't just been forgotten. I'd been edited out. I didn't leave that day. But something shifted. Not in anger. No slammed doors. No late-night texts. Just a quiet recalibration. Like when a house finally settles and the floor creaks differently. I started small. I muted the family group chat. Then I archived it. Then 3 weeks later I left it. No message. No, sorry, just need a break. Just gone. No one followed up. I unshared my calendar from the family's planning board, the one I'd created years ago, so we could stay on top of each other's lives. I figured it wasn't needed anymore. No one had checked it in months. Then I opened a new business email, moved my biggest clients there, told them I'd be scaling down my design work for personal reasons. Most of them didn't ask. The ones who did accepted my answer without pressing. People can feel when you're slowly pulling away. Some respect it. Family rarely does. The only thing I kept was the garden shears. It sounds silly, I know, but that day at the barbecue right after the joke, my dad had handed me the shears and told me to go trim the dead stuff around the roses. I did. I spent 20 minutes on my knees clipping back dry branches while everyone else drank and laughed. Later, when I went to toss them back in the shed, I paused. Then I wiped the blades clean, wrapped them in an old towel, and put them in the trunk of my car. They were the last thing he handed me. The last thing I accepted from that house. After that, I rented a small storage unit in a nearby town, cash only. I boxed up the essentials: birth certificate, tax records, a few clothes, some photo albums I didn't trust them to keep. I labeled the boxes in vague terms: office, seasonal, misc. I opened a new bank account under my middle name, switched pharmacies, changed my mailing address to a P.O. box. Nothing sudden, nothing dramatic. But if you looked closely, you'd have seen it, the outline of someone fading. I didn't want a confrontation. I wasn't looking for a moment. I just needed enough distance between me and the next inevitable hurt. And in those final weeks as I moved through their house helping clean up birthday parties, I wasn't invited to doing dishes no one thanked me for. I kept waiting. Not for an apology. Just for someone to notice I was leaving. But no one did. It started with a phone call I didn't answer. Then another. Then a string of texts from my mother, each more clipped than the last. "Have you talked to your brother? Kyle's going through a tough time. We could really use your help right now." I didn't respond. From what I gathered through whispers, mostly from Becca's vague social media posts, Kyle had moved out of the house. There were rumors of someone else, a coworker, maybe two. Becca changed her profile picture to just her and the kids. The wedding photos disappeared. The comments stopped being cheerful. Then came the calls from my dad. He didn't use emojis or exclamation points. Just short sentences that sounded like commands pretending to be questions. "You free to talk this week? Could use some advice." Things are complicated. I ignored them too. Because by then, I already knew. Not the details, but the shape of it. I could feel the panic under their words. The slow unraveling of a story they'd built around someone else, a version of the family that worked as long as I stayed quiet, and Kyle looked shiny. But Kyle wasn't shiny anymore. He'd opened a side project a year earlier, some kind of real estate thing. Family-backed, my father had said proudly at Christmas. I remember watching Kyle hand out branded pins to relatives like it was a Fortune 500 launch. What they didn't know was that he had borrowed against their home equity, had Dad signed some temporary bridge documents under the pretense of getting better loan terms. He'd drained their savings, overextended credit lines, and disappeared just as the numbers caught up. And now the bank was circling. The house was at risk. Their retirement was slipping. Their perfect son had put them at the edge of foreclosure. That's when they really started calling. I didn't block them. I just watched. Watched the voicemails stack up. Watched the emails go from confident to desperate. Elaine, we didn't know. This isn't your brother. He's just lost right now. We need to come together as a family. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, they built a home on my silence. Every meal I cooked, every bill I helped cover, every word I swallowed so Kyle could be louder, shinier, more celebrated. And now the house was caving in, and I was still outside, standing in the dark. Sometimes I imagined picking up the phone. I even drafted responses. But every time I'd hear that voice in my head, my father's that day at the barbecue, if Elaine disappeared tomorrow, and I'd think, maybe I already did. The first time I saw my mother in person after everything, it was at a coffee shop halfway between her house and the city. Neutral ground. Her idea. She was already seated when I arrived, stirring a cup she hadn't touched. The second she saw me, she smiled like nothing had happened. You look tired, she said. Are you eating enough? Not. I'm sorry. Not. We missed you. Just a rerun of motherly concern like that would cover the months of silence. I ordered a tea, sat down, waited. Finally, she said, Your father's proud. He just doesn't always show it. Then, after a beat, Kyle made mistakes. But you've always been the stronger one. We were hoping maybe you could talk to the bank. Just until things settle. There it was. They didn't want me back. They wanted me functional, reliable, the way I'd always been before I asked for space, before I stopped saying yes. He's your brother, she added softer now. He's not well, and Becca's been difficult. The word hung there, difficult, as if Becca hadn't been the one cheated on, as if the only thing that mattered now was cleaning up quietly. I didn't speak. I didn't nod. I just let her keep going. She moved into emotional territory next, said the house felt empty, that Dad didn't sleep well, that the grandkids asked where Aunt Lainey was. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. I know you've been hurt. I know we weren't great. But what's the point of holding on to all that family's still family, right? That's when I felt it. Not anger, not pain. Just the weight of her words, how cleanly they swept the past into a drawer, shut it tight, and asked me to pretend none of it happened. As if the silence didn't matter. As if the joke never landed. As if I hadn't slowly bled out of their lives while they cheered for someone else. I pulled my hand back gently. I didn't hold on to anything I said. I let go. That's why I'm still standing. She looked down, then back up, unsure whether to cry or smile. As we stood to leave, someone else caught my eye. Samantha, an old friend from high school, the one person who had always seen me clearly even when we drifted apart. She'd once told me years ago, You're the glue, Elaine. They just don't know what happens when glue walks away. She'd been at that BBQ too. She'd heard the joke. Now seeing me, she walked over and said quietly, I'm glad you're okay. Just, maybe don't stir things up now. They're already overwhelmed. And that was the final shift. Even the one person who used to defend me, now just wanted things to stay quiet. I didn't go back to the house. Even after the coffee shop, after the voicemails turned soft, after the emails came with phrases like, We know we haven't been fair, I didn't go. I mailed a check, not a large one, but enough to buy them time. Enough to keep the bank quiet for a while. I left the memo line blank. Then I printed a single sheet of paper, my portion of the house title signed over. No strings, no notes, just a clean transfer. I drove out early on a Tuesday and dropped the envelope in their mailbox. No knock, no conversation, just the sound of gravel under my tires as I pulled away. I thought I might feel sad, or empty, or angry, but I didn't. I felt still, like a lake before dawn. Flat and wide and finished. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. I didn't need them to say I was right, or wrong, or anything at all. I had stopped asking to be seen. A week later, my mother sent a photo of the kids holding a thank you sign. No caption, no voice, just the picture like it was proof we were still a family. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They had their proof. I had mine. Because there's something that happens when you finally stop fighting for a seat at the table. You realize the table was never built with you in mind, and the silence that used to crush you. It starts to sound like freedom. So when they asked later in subtler ways if I'd be back for Thanksgiving, if I could help organize Kyle's oldest kid's birthday, if I wanted to rejoin the family album, I answered the same way every time, with stillness, with space, with the kind of no that doesn't need a raised voice to be heard, but just once I let myself speak. It was over the phone. My father called on a Sunday afternoon and I picked up. He sounded tired, older, softer. "We're trying to do better," he said. "You know that, right?" I didn't reply right away. Then I said simply, "I was there." "You just never looked." He went quiet. I let him stay there. The following summer they held another barbecue. I wasn't invited, but I saw the photos through someone else's social feed. Mutual friend. One of those posts meant to look spontaneous but curated just enough. Everyone was there. Kyle, Becca, the kids. Mom in her floral apron. Dad manning the grill again like nothing had ever burned. Balloons, potato salad. Even Mrs. Houghton made another appearance. And in one photo, I saw it. My old seat, the one near the patio fan, had a name card this time. It wasn't mine. It said Jackson in big blue letters. Kyle's youngest. The chair had been passed down, reassigned, like I'd never sat there to begin with. No one noticed the garden shears. They were still by the porch. Rusted now, half buried in overgrown mulch, one handle snapped. Forgotten like the girl who once used them. But I remembered. That was the last thing my father handed me. The last thing I chose to keep. So I returned the gesture. 1 month later, a letter arrived in their mailbox. No return address, just one sentence. "You noticed yet." Signed Elaine Monroe. That was it. No explanation. No plea. Just a reminder that something once lived in the silence they'd learned to talk over. I don't know if they read it, or what they said, or who they blamed. I only know they never wrote back, and for once I didn't need them to. If you ever left quietly just to see who would notice, you're not alone.